Frozen and Tangled, movies which are about how having eternal youth present and withheld from the general population manifests itself in hidden ways, feature some architectural metaphors that are very much about homelessness. To call someone homeless is really an odd and projective way of describing them. Home doesn't consist merely of one component, as I see it, the real estate component, a physical place to call a place where you can chill out and take care of your necessities of life. But also, it should include, I would think, a social component. And in Tangled, particularly, we see this contrast. There are two types of homeless people in Tangled. In the community, which is homeless in another way because it's unnamed. Even the kingdom is unnamed. Even the king and queen are unnamed. They're not recognized as members of a family in that way, the way a child would be when born into one. So I'll call this community Riverside, just for argument's sake, since the breaking of the dam constitutes a major part in the plot. But this disparity is quite dramatic in the movie. The lowest class criminals, the thugs in the Snuggly Duckling and Flynn, who comes to drag Rapunzel out of her tower, have lots of community in one sense. They aren't homeless in that they don't have other people that they're regularly in contact with. They have quite an abundance of social contacts, a replacement family, a community. Rapunzel is, of course, the exact opposite. She has only one major person in her life. Her real family is partly estranged from her biological family at least. And she is born into criminality and a wide gap between rich and poor. The power she has are hers because they were taken from the people at large. And she lives a life of isolation as the maiden in the tower, just like the characters in Frozen, Anna and Elsa do. She is homeless in the sense that she has all sorts of real estate, both hidden and in her daily initial life. And in Frozen, this becomes even more dramatic, where Elsa makes an entire castle where she's the only occupant, and tries to turn her kingdom into a kingdom where she's the only occupant by freezing everyone to death. But this shows up in this phenomenon in which the poor criminals have lots, or maybe much more than they want in the way of contact with other people. The rich criminals have virtually none. The rich criminals have got all the real estate, the poor criminals have got none of it. So when you have this group in society who are hiding from everybody else the fact that they have access to eternal youth, and in Frozen, perhaps even the capacity to bring people back from the dead, because there's certain hints of creation and cryogenesis and the reversal of cryogenesis, and the possibility that Elsa and Anna's parents could be brought back, considering all the incredibly other powerful, magical things that the sisters do. And this is the greatest horror, perhaps, underlying in the movie, is that it can be done, and it isn't. Then you have a ruling class who try to keep people from putting all these pieces together, understanding why their community is the way that it is, why it's so segregated, why there's such a gap between the rich and the poor, and why one group is kept separated from the other and kept from knowing the whole picture of what's going on, because the poor know a little bit of what's happening, the rich know a little bit of what's happening, and the people in one tower know a little bit, and the people in the other tower know a little bit, but nobody's actually putting all the pieces together, except perhaps the criminals themselves. For those in the tower, the only contacts they really have are criminal contacts. In Frozen, Anna's brought up with her sister, and the moment she gets away from her sister, she just meets another criminal in the form of Hans, who's very much emotionally like her sister. And Hans, in the song Love is an Open Door, talks about he wants a place. He wants the real estate, the one half of home. Anna wants someone to replace her absent sister and her absent parents, the human, social contact, family contact half of what she considers home. Hans, of course, has far more of this than he wants. He has 12 brothers who treat him horribly, sadistically. And the trolls, who are the other foster family of Kristoff in the movie, are also psychopathic, narcissistic, etc. I looked up the definition of what an internet troll is in a study that had been done on the behavior of internet trolls, and they were defined as these people who were trolls were studied and found to score very highly in indicators for narcissism, psychopathy, and sadism, all the qualities which are displayed in Hans or his family in the movie. So let's say we have this community where the means to make people eternally young exist, and they're being hidden from the general population. How would that show up in the architecture of the community? Well, there would be, in one case, in Tangled, a tendency towards demolition. There's this incredible amount of havoc wreaked when the guards and Eugene's partners and the Maximus horse are chasing after him, and they demolish a whole section of the countryside or the community, which would normally be by a river, and by breaking a dam. So the bonding between Eugene/Flynn and Rapunzel begins when they believe they're about to die and they're drowned, and they start to reveal things to each other. Flynn reveals that his real name is Eugene, something he would not otherwise do unless he were on the point of death, because he's a classic narcissist. He has a true self and a false self, one that he never wants to tell anyone about, but he says so at the moment of death because he feels he doesn't have to hold it back any longer. So there's this, in this compartmentalized society in which people are kept apart by this underlying horror that some want to actively keep secret from the general population, and that the general population at some level doesn't want to acknowledge. People are brought together by criminality, and by natural disasters associated with criminality. So that when you chase after the criminal, things get disrupted, and then there's flooding, or in Elsa's case, there's the snowing. So if you had a community like this, in which the cover-up of the possibility of making people young again were manifested in the architecture, you would have this artificial rate of turnover of everything that's built. You'd have things getting wiped out, in the case of Tangled, washed away. Or in the case of Frozen, being dramatically overbuilt and in rapid time frames, and with much more real estate than the people with the power need in order to live, even as that space is withheld from the lower classes. So you have this sort of weaponization of the poor being who are in some ways colluding with the rich, who have much in common with the rich, in the sense they have one half of the community, the rich has the other half. And in Tangled, there's this apparent collusion between those who would want to get Rapunzel back and those who get her back and do the kidnappings and the invasion of the prison and the springing of Flynn so he can act like a hero and go get Rapunzel back from someone who's only tried to keep her alive all of her life, and naturally he hasn't harmed her. So when you have this sort of society, then you have the false heroism as a key element. Flynn rides off to save Rapunzel, even though she's in no danger. and actually tries to kill himself, Rapunzel, and her foster mother in one fell swoop. Because he has this alternate ego with a different name. Even he has two personalities, and he will do anything to maintain the heroic persona, including killing everyone around him. So in these movies, virtually all the main characters have got some severe personality disorder, to put it mildly. The simple way is to say they're just plain evil. But they are the ones linked together and around whom the story is built. And they're all naturally conspiratorial with each other. They have things in common. They are bound together by a common need to hide a certain piece of knowledge from everybody else. So, if one were anything other than the criminal element in these societies, whether the ones at the top or at the bottom, it would become a matter of survival to start working together to find alternate networks and social contacts and a means of countering the power wielded by those people who are bonded together by criminality, and to look at what's being held from the general population. In Tangled, there's a symbolic passage through four elements, this transmutation that occurs in the couple's identity. They go underneath the earth to escape first, then they swing through the air to escape, then they go through flood, and they're flooded out to escape. Finally, at the end of this, they bond over a fire. They tell each other their stories and become closer over a campfire. In Frozen, it's even more important to have fire because it's fundamental to the magical powers of Anna as a character. And that's what's always in danger of being snuffed out. Of course, in Calgary now, we have this being acted out even more dramatically. Fire, and in Alberta, fire, of course, is something that's withheld from people as a method of psychological and spiritual warfare. And the withholding of fire in Frozen is largely done with the storm, the snowstorm, which Elsa sings about in Let It Go, and which our mayor of Calgary has actually sung. The same song, he's actually sung Let It Go in public, which is a pretty horrific thing if you know what the song means and what it represents about someone not having to follow the rule of law, and that their rules are just for other people, they aren't for me. And when it's sung by the mayor, the number one magistrate of the city, the one who is the biggest arbiter of law in a city, that's a truly horrific thing. And of course, today in Alberta, we have the implementation of rules along the lines of just what Elsa would do. Elsa is about withholding fire and making life illegal, even when you have the power to create it in a limited sense, or perhaps even restore it. All of that's hidden. So faced with such things, that makes it imperative for everybody who isn't part of this criminal network of characters that be depicted in these sorts of movies to work together and start to make their own support network